Okay, guys, in yesterday's lesson, we talked about the trip Europeans made to come to America and how the voyage by boat was full of peril, took months to get here, and there was a major struggle once they arrived. The men wanted to look for gold and fortune and were unwilling to work on making safe shelter. We also talked about John Rolfe taking a couple of steps to make the colonies safer. He brought tobacco, a crop worth value, and he married Pocahontas, which made an allegiance between his people and the Native American groups. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the Pilgrims and the Puritans. We're going to figure out why they came over and the challenges they faced. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to take a look at Chapter 3, Lesson 2. A kind of company called a stock company helped with colonization. And a stock company is a company owned by many different people where they all own a piece of it or a share. The main goal of a stock company is to make money. So you're going to give them some money, hoping they can turn it around and make it into a profit. People who give money to a stock company are called investors. Now, investing is risky. If a company grows, you can make a ton of money off of it. But if the company goes out of business, the money or the investment you gave them is lost. So the Plymouth Company was a stock company, and they had permission to settle in Virginia. But they ended up actually settling in New England. The first attempt for them to set up was a failure. They didn't plan, and they weren't ready for what they were getting into. Okay. So, why people were leaving England then? Religious problems were increasing in England under the king. The king was really unhappy with the way a certain group of people were practicing their Christianity. So they became known as the separatists of the Pilgrims. And these are just people that are practicing Christianity, but a different version than the king wants them to. So they wanted to separate from the Church of England completely, and they were treated very unfairly. They were put in jail. They would lose their property. So first, they left and went to Holland, which is in Western Europe. So they left England, went to Holland. They weren't super comfortable there, though, because in Holland they had a different language and a lot of different customs. So they were moving somewhere completely foreign to them. So they weren't really able to get settled in and have their own place because they always felt like outsiders. How did the Pilgrims get here and what kind of plans did they make? A group of Pilgrims formed a stock company and they bought up as many shares as they could, but they needed way more money than they had to actually get to America. The Pilgrims were able to get some extra money, but that extra money's not free. It came with some strings attached to it. So they made a deal with this group called the London Company. So the London Company said, they'll pay for the ticket, they'll help you get here, but in exchange, you have to live where they tell you to live. You have to work for the London Company for 7 years and give them all of your profits. Then after 7 years, you could do what you pleased. So you're giving up 7 years of your life in exchange for a ticket to come to America. So the Pilgrims set sail on the Mayflower. It took them over 2 months to get here. So they were supposed to land in Virginia, but a storm had blown them off course, and they didn't land where they were actually supposed to. So they'd already broken this first rule. So since they broke the first rule, they decided they needed to come up with a new set of rules and guidelines for the place they were going to settle. So they elected a guy named John Carver to be the leader, but John Carver wasn't around that long. He ended up dying because this journey was tough and people's health wasn't very good after 2 months on a boat. William Bradford was the next leader, and he was their leader for about 30 years. they knew that choosing a leader was important. They didn't want it to be like England, where a person was a king regardless of their merits. They wanted to choose a leader who was skilled. So they decided to choose their leaders by majority rules. And what that means is they would vote, and whoever had the most support is the person who would be in charge. So they wanted to make things by majority rule in the democratic process. So they wanted to have more of a say in their government than they did with a king. And that's called the Mayflower Compact. So this was a big change. It's been a long time since there's been a true democracy. This was the first time that there was a democracy in America. So the Mayflower Compact didn't solve all the problems of the colony because the piece of land they settled on had poor soil, the winter was harsh. They had very strict religious practices, and because their rules were so strict, it was hard to get more people to come and live with the Pilgrims. Think about the classrooms we have. You don't want to go to a class where the rules are super strict every single day. You're not going to look forward to that class. And that's the same way it was with the Pilgrims. Their rules were very, very strict, so it was really hard for them to attract new people. So the next group of people that comes over are called the Puritans. Now the Puritans are similar to the Pilgrims, but a little bit different. So they are being treated unfairly by the king. He does not agree with their religion, and this is just two different versions of Christianity. It's difficult for the king to get involved with them. It's difficult for him to deal with them because a lot of these Puritans have authority. They are, rich people. They have a lot of pull when it comes to the community. So what he decides to do, he gets them fired from their jobs, and he puts a lot of them in jail. So now the Puritans know they have to make a decision. They could stay and be treated unfairly, or they can leave. So in 1629, some Pilgrims decided they were tired of it and they were ready to go. They got permission to set up in Massachusetts Bay. And unlike the Pilgrims, they were prepared. They had 1,000 people with them. They had doctors, they had teachers, they had preachers. They had lots of time to plan, and they made sure they had tons of supplies. They knew this trip to America was going to be very, very risky, and they didn't want to get in over their heads. So they set sail with 15 boats, and they landed in Boston, Massachusetts. John Winthrop became their governor, and within a few years, their population went from 1,000 to 10,000. Now, they were similar to the Pilgrims in the fact that they had very strict religious beliefs too. And they were also kind of hypocrites. So they came here for religious freedom. They didn't like the king telling them how to worship, but once they got here, they did the same thing as the king. They made it so if you were living in their area, you had to follow their religion. You had to go to their church. So they came here for religious freedom, but they didn't give that freedom of religion to others. So they were hypocrites. All laws dealing with religion, trade, and business and government were made according to their religion. So even if you were not a Puritan, you had to follow the rules that were set up for their religion. Every colonist was expected to follow these rules, and there were very strict measures taken to make sure people were actually following what the Puritans believed. Okay, guys, that's it. We'll take a look at the Google worksheet, and I'll help you guys figure it out.